Okay, hello everyone. How are we all doing?
Greetings.
Good, thanks. How are you?
Good. Thanks. I'm very well, thank you. Really pleased to be here. Welcome to our panel, 81 Uprising, Passing the Torch. Now, this year marks 40 years since the Brixton riots took place, and we're here today to sort of connect two generations and have an open conversation about the legacy of what the Brixton riots in 1981 meant for the future of activism in this country and around the world in the struggle against racial injustice. Now, we have an amazing lineup of, an amazing panel of people from different generations I'm really excited to introduce you to. We have some people who were alive and well during the riots, and we have some people who are from a younger generation who have been learning more about the riots in this commemorative year. And we got two gentlemen who have, made outstanding contributions to the British Caribbean community. We have Tony Cealy, who's an actor, director, theatre trainer, who's worked to support the disadvantaged people through theatre. And we have Kwesi Shaddai, who's actually the son of a Black Panther, which is really interesting, and is now a Pan-African community activist and one of the builders behind 81 Acts of Exuberant Defiance, amongst many other things, which is part of the reason we're here today. And now from the younger generation, we have Pamela, Hannah, Shane, and is Valeria with us today, or is it just Pamela, Hannah, and Shane?
Yeah, okay. Valeria is not here today.
Awesome. Pamela, Hannah, and Shane, and who are all members of the amazing Decolonised Networking organization. Now, Decolonised Networking actually seeks to allow people from BPOC backgrounds to have a fair opportunity at reaching their goals by challenging the racialized effects of nepotism. So an amazing lineup, and I'm sure we're gonna have a really good conversation. I'm really excited. Now, in terms of our audience, any audience members, I'd invite you to just type any questions that you have out in the chat or put them in the Q&A section, and I'll choose a few at the end. We'll have 5 minutes at the end to sort of talk through some of them. And without further ado, I have some questions for Kwesi and Tony. Now, were both of you there at the riots, or do you have any memories of the riots at all?
You want to take this one, Tony?
Well, do you want to explain your position and then I'll take it?
Well, I wasn't quite born.
Okay.
My mum and dad were there though. They met on Railton Road, so I kind of grew up in the shadow of the history and just knowing that there was this big uprising, there was this big riot. The police did get a bloody nose that day, and it was an act of community empowerment. So I kind of grew up hearing about what happened.
Okay, awesome. Tony, do you have anything to add to that about, I mean, I'm sure there's so much to sort of delve into. I think I could probably ask you a better question, Tony, which is, could you describe the reasons for the riots? If you could sort of describe it in one sentence, what do you think the actual reason behind the riots were?
Particularly as a young Black boy of that time in the late 70s going into the 80s, all I know is that the Black youth, my friends included, we'd had enough of being victimized by the police. The amount of stop and search that was done in a brutal way was partly what led up to the uprisings, but what led up to the uprisings for me was just that there was lots of problems within the Black community around housing, unemployment, the inequality, social injustices around the issues that were affecting the Black community, and essentially we had had enough. And so I think for some young Black people in Brixton at that time, it was an opportunity to fight back and strike back, which led to the uprising over those 2 days.
Okay, so with regards to how the riots kind of started, where did the leadership come from? Was there any sort of particular person or group of people that sort of the community looked to sort of spark this riot and spark this uprising, or was it just something that sort of came about sporadically?
I think there were friends of the chap that got help by the police, because essentially what happened on the day was that the police, as well as carrying out their normal duties, they saw a young man running down the road with some stab wounds, blood gushing, and wanted to help him. And they tried to help him and put him in a car and take him away. But at the same time, some other youths who had experience of stop and search and, you know, didn't like the way that the police were doing their policing, saw this particular incident, and they assumed that this chap wasn't being taken to the hospital because they didn't know that insight and intelligence at that time. They just saw what the police were doing, was taking up this young black boy with, you know, stab wounds and stuff and putting him into a car. So that made them get really angry, and that made that particular incident spark into where they had to call for reinforcements.
Right, okay, interesting. So, you know, given that you were there at the time, did it feel as though it was the Afro-Caribbean community against the police and the institutions, or did it feel as though it was sort of the whole Brixton community that was sort of?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. From my point of view, in the beginning, you know, when I see who was taking part, who were, you know, resisting against the police, from a certain perspective, it was definitely, you know, the black community, particularly young black men and women, but, you know, a lot of young black men were really picking up the batons and the Molotov cocktails and the bricks and bottles and, you know, resisting back against the police. But when you think about Brixton as a whole, and the uprising spreading out minutes, hours, days later, all of Brixton got involved. When I say all of Brixton, those who wanted to rebel and find a way back to fight against the police. And so in that sense, you have a whole range of different communities, not only the black and white in Brixton, but you have the punks who were there. They also fought back in their own way. You had the very strong black gay community that were there also. They equally fought back. And they were obviously older people who strategically were doing things in that time. So essentially that's what I mean by the whole of Brixton, who were really on that sort of activism, rebellious side to fight back against the uprising. So it was really a wide range of different people in the community that were at the helm. But, you know, we got this, when I say we, the black community got the center stage and center media attention.
No doubt, no doubt. Okay, thank you for that. And a quick question for you, Kwesi. You know, so we heard a bit about the young black men picking up sort of batons and whatnot when they were sort of trying to fight back against the police. How does it feel for you, you know, hearing that that was sort of the way that people took to deal with this? Do you feel as though the community dealt with it the right way?
I do. I mean, it just goes to show how bad the situation was at the time. I mean, it essentially started over a misunderstanding in terms of what the police were doing. People really thought that a stabbed man was being arrested. That just goes to show how bad the situation was. I mean, this was happening in the middle of Operation Swamp. They'd increased the number of police in the area. There was always a number of police in the area anyway. And yeah, I think they'd stopped and searched maybe 1,000 people like that day, those few days around the time. So pretty much everybody that was involved had some kind of interaction with the police that day or the day before. So the community really didn't have much choice. I mean, there were leaders in the community prior to that were trying to campaign around better housing, better employment prospects, you know, better educational opportunities for young people, but it was falling on deaf ears. And the attitude of the government was dismissive. They were overtly racist. They weren't trying to hide their contempt for us. It was palpable. I mean, they called it Operation Swamp. We were animals to them, and they were very kind of clear on that. So I'm more surprised that, you know, it hadn't sparked off sooner, and that there haven't been more similar uprisings based on the conditions that people are kind of forced to live under in our communities. So it might not have been, I don't know, the most tactful approach, but it was effective. And the legacy of it, it's kind of
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I've got a question for you guys, Shane, Hannah, and Pamela. How does it how does it make you guys feel to sort of, you know, to know that this is something that took place? I mean, I'm pretty sure all of us are South Londoners. So to know that this is something that happened in South London, and to know that, you know, this is something that the generation before us sort of had to deal with. How does it make you feel hearing those stories?
I think I could say it's not very surprising hearing what the people have had to go through. I think it's very common. It's a story we all know very well. But I think what's shocking is the way the language around it is handled, the way the media representation is around the uprising, and the way it's discussed is completely different from the narrative in which we see it through people who actually experience what those people would have experienced or something similar.
It's interesting you say that, because, you know, that's a lot of what I sort of hear people saying these days about how there's a sort of difference between the way that, you know, like the narratives around it coming from the media and from sort of the higher powers, whether it's the government, and the sort of way that we, the people, sort of would talk about it and describe these events and, you know, what led up to them and why they happened. Pamela, do you think that our generation is sort of going through a lot of the same stuff that the previous generation was going through? Do you think there's been any change? Or if there has been change, has it been real change?
Definitely. You can see by today's society that it's still an ongoing issue, people rising up against, you know, the higher powers and authority, those in authority, and the police, and, you know, unlawful murders that keep happening, like in America, against, you know, the Black community. And it's sad to see that there has been no real change. And despite all the, you know, peaceful protests, the marches, I don't know, like the overall the structure needs to be changed, but I don't know what has to happen for the major change to have to become like, because even with, you know, George Floyd 1 year on, you know, not much has changed at all. And it takes, like, the 81 uprisings was major in South London, and there was a lot of violence and stuff, but still I know a lot of people that I've spoken to, you know, my age, that aren't from South London, that didn't even know it happened. So it's like some things in history that go on that are really important in our community goes unheard. And I feel like, you know, 10 years on, younger generations won't know what happened, you know, last summer, and with George Floyd and stuff, and a lot of these things that happen, that big changes and horrible things that happen in the hands of authority go unheard of. And yeah, there's no real change.
Okay.
There has been no real change.
Yeah, so a lot of sort of like performativeness is what I'm getting that you're saying. Tony, how does it make you feel to sort of hear that, you know, and I think there's some truth to it as well, that, you know, so many people in our generation don't even really know about what happened in 1981, and probably aren't even aware of the similarities between what generations before us went through and what a lot of us are going through at the moment.
How does it make me feel? I suppose, you know, I think, I suppose being really open and crude about it, in one way, disappointing and sad. In another way, you know, it's just the way life is going, in a way that, you know, you can't control how people take in information on what they should know about in terms of traditions and cultures and heritage. You know, if there are people who are brought up in different cultures and heritages, and they are not aware of previous traditions for whatever reason. Maybe the parents haven't, you know, introduced them, friends or peers, they're not in the right circles. But anyone, we all know, if we want to look at history, we can look back and trace what has gone on. So in a way, yeah, I mean, in a way, you could kind of say that every person of color should know about, you know, certain events that have gone on. But in another way, you know, who's responsible to ensure that that needs to happen? And if it doesn't happen, what does that mean for that person? Are they less of a person who are educated to know about their past and their history, and so they don't know about their their history? And would that make them less of a kind of activist, or less of a kind of a knowledgeable person for going forward in terms of representing who they are as a culture? Or does it, it's a really interesting one. But generally speaking, yeah, people should know about their history and their heritage. Even if they refuse to kind of take it on or understand it, I think they should at least acknowledge that this is what their forefathers or foreparents had been through. Talk to people about the Holocaust. People ain't going to go to you, oh, what's that? People know about it. People know about the transatlantic slave trade. People know about it. And so I think with things like, the Brixton Uprising or the Battle of Lewisham or the Stonewall or whatever things that happen culturally in communities across the world, I think it's important that, younger generations know about what happened in the past, particularly if they're on that journey of activism and social change. I think it's important that they kind of at least have some indication of the past.
Yeah. Well, can I just ask a quick question? Does everyone here know what the Battle of Lewisham was? Can I get a show of hands if you know what happened at the Battle of Lewisham? Okay, so we got some. Okay, we got a couple of Okay. Well, Battle of Lewisham was in 1977. It was sort of a big clash between sort of like Rock Against Racism and the National Front, and people in the sort of South East London community just said, nope, these National Front are not going to walk through here. It turned into a big fight, and there was a lot of suggestion that the police were more on the side of the National Front, but it was quite a watershed moment in sort of like the racial history of London. Kwesi, why do you think that most people don't know what the Battle of Lewisham is, and what do you think these sort of implications of that are for all of us as a generation?
It's a really good question. The Battle of Lewisham in particular, there really isn't a willingness on the part of the government to kind of put that information out there, because on the day the police were effectively, and those links kind of between the government and the far right are long-standing, and they're continuing to this day, as we can see with a lot of the things happening today. So I think the reason why a lot of people don't know about it is because it's not in the state's interest, and where it is remembered as an important day and as a really empowering day, finally, who can see the significance of it. Like I can see, the significance of it, and that's what's needed. People who see how important it is for us to be aware of what's really happening in this country. People who are privy to that information, they do kind of have a responsibility to kind of share that. As Tony said, especially within activist circles, young activists have a responsibility to be aware of the history that they're involved in, the road that they're on. So yeah, unless we're telling our own stories, the state's never going to do that for us.
Thank you. Tony, I think you're on mute, I'm afraid.
Yes, I was just thinking what Kwesi was saying was very important, that's all.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah. No, I couldn't agree more myself. Hannah, I have a question for you. Do you think that our generation sort of, carries the same spirit as the generation that sort of took to the streets in 1981? Do you think that we have sort of the courage to do that, or whether you think it was courage that led them to do that, or just sheer frustration? Do you think there's similarities between us and that generation?
I think there's some similarities, but also a lot of differences. I think like social media has allowed us to sort of collaborate and join together for like protests and things like that. But also at the same time, I think there's like a lot more risks to it. So for example, like a lot of the protests that we were attending in summer, they were using like facial recognition and things like that. I think there's a lot of similarities, but I hope that social media means that we can sort of facilitate it in a more like organized and successful way. I think the main thing getting in the way of our generation is you know, for example, you're talking about like how everyone in the Decolonised Networking team, we all went like that for about Lewisham. I think it's just really making sure that we get sort of an unbiased education about history, which I can't say that you receive at school, definitely. And then even on Google, it's quite hard to get something that's unbiased. So yeah.
You know, yeah, a really good answer. Like, I agree with you. And I think what was interesting that you said was about sort of like facial recognition and the fact that, you know, for people who are protesting, I know that the government and the police are really clamping down on our right to protest. And, you know, technology is making it so much harder for us to be able to express ourselves in that way without, you know, ending up in prison. So sort of question for everyone, like, you know, how do we deal with this? I mean, I know it's not the easiest question to answer just, you know, off the tip of your tongue, but, you know, how do we sort of maneuver around the government's attempts to stop us from being able to express ourselves in this way?
I think with COVID and face masks, that obviously helps, of like a way of wearing sort of something that disguises your face, maybe in a less obvious way.
Yeah. Anyone else got any suggestions? I think that's probably the most logical one.
I think solidarity. I mean, the police sentencing courts and yeah, the PCSC bill. It affects so many different communities that if all of the communities who are affected by it stand to, for instance, you got the Gypsy, Traveller, Roma community who are specifically affected in parts of it. You have young people who have previously been convicted, they're being specifically targeted in part of it. You've got local authorities who are being given basically police powers to do policing in the communities and schools and whatnot and hospitals. If everybody involved in all of these institutions and sectors and everyone who's personally affected by it stands together, and that is happening. We've seen, you know, a lot, the Kill the Bill campaign, for example. There's been a lot of information sharing between different communities. And that is the only response to it. What they'd love for us to do is each stay in our own silo, be it culturally, in terms of age groups, that's what they prefer. But if this response to it is as broad as possible, that's going to be our best hope.
Well, thank you for that. And I agree with you. I think, you know, solidarity between all groups of people is the way forward and the only way to really deal with the government. Moving on to a slightly different topic, you know, someone mentioned a little bit earlier on about the difference in between sort of the purpose of a lot of this sort of protest and the way that the media, you know, reports on it. Is rioting counterproductive for Black people?
I think the term itself, the term riot, is really loaded and it's used against Black people a lot. I think when we're fighting for just the simple rights to exist and to live, that word is used often to make us seem violent, make us seem extreme, and I don't think it's a great defining term.
I think it's a really wonderful question, and I can only laugh about it because, you know, obviously got 56 lived experience years, and you know, looking back in my youth, you know, I definitely would have got involved in anything that would have been about upsetting the state and fighting back and being a real rabble rouser and troublemaker, ready to pick up to Batalan, lick down to Babylon and whatever. I would have been definitely up for that. And then now looking at different, you know, activisms that has happened over the last year, looking at particularly the Black Lives Matter during the lockdown, and what I see in my cynical point of view now is that there's all these fireworks that have kicked off across the whole world, and everybody, I'm making big assumptions here, in the world knows about Black Lives Matter now. And so there was this huge fireworks, popcorn, everybody getting on the streets and rage and protest and this. And I call that all that fireworks, just for the sake of it. And at the end of all the fireworks, then what? Now what? What has changed? Who's gone to make this thing become policy or law, or who has done something that's managed to get through the concrete wall, or the people upstairs to take notice and make changes that are really, we're seeing the effect of those changes on the ground. I don't see much out of all of the fireworks that have really made that change. I get it, because it's made people aware that, you know, this has happened, and you know, it's your life as well, so come and hold hands and come and fight and come and kumbaya and come and get together. But at the end of all of that, I don't really see much has changed in terms of that's helped, you know, the Black community, this community, that community, out of all of that work. I don't see much that has changed. And if there has been, please, somebody tell me, shut up, Tony, it's all been worthwhile.
Well, you know, let me ask you, Pamela, do you think that Black Lives Matter did more for Black people and for society as a whole, or less? Still on mute, by the way, sorry.
I think as a whole, like Tony said, it did well in, you know, like letting people know like what's been happening, and you know, it's the power of social media and having loads of people turn up and protest. But like Tony said, it's fireworks, and not much has come out of it. And if anything, you know, the bill to kill the right to protest and stuff has kind of, you know, the Black Lives Matter protest kind of is the reason because of that, not just that protest, but just, you know, the increment of protests in general. Even though they're peaceful protests and stuff, it's like the higher powers and stuff don't like the community getting together and, you know, just raising their voices on what they want to see change. But yeah.
So then, guys, what is the future kind of, you know, looking like for this kind of protest? Does it have a place in our society today, if, you know, a lot of it ends up sort of resulting in performative things happening? I mean, I suppose one could argue that, you know, a performative response from the institutions is one of the most counterproductive things that you can have, because it sort of creates the illusion of progress and actually, you know, takes away the responsibility from the powers that be for actually making any real change. You know, what do we think about that? And if we agree with that, then what else can we do?
I think that's another good question. I mean, first of all, we're clear that the government has an agenda for us. So them, you know, taking performative steps is the worst thing they can do, because we know that their oppression of us, that isn't performative, that's very real. So it's dangerous for us to accept performative steps. And I don't know, in terms of the effectiveness of the protests, and you know, what's changed, I think what it shows more than anything is the need for us as a community, and in solidarity with other communities and everybody who's affected by what's happening, to really focus on having conversations ourselves, having internal conversations. Of course, it's important to go out and say to the state and the society that's oppressing you that your life matters. Cool. We need to have that conversation with each other and let each other know that we matter. When you do that, then you can build an agenda. Then you can build a mandate for what it is you want to do. I'm not sure how many conversations on a large scale, like, you know, public assembly stuff, I'm not sure how much of that has happened. I'm not sure what kind of mandate has been built for change. I know that among activist groups, certainly there's been a lot of conversations and there have been agendas put forward. Or, you know, in our community, maybe the 1% are activists. So in terms of the average person, man, woman, and child walking down the street, what's their thoughts? What is their agenda? And what input have they had in terms of suggesting solutions? I think that we really need to have more internal conversations as a community collectively, as much as we are focusing on, you know, trying to get more Black people on the TV or whatever it is that we're asking the state for. We need to see what we can ask of each other and what we can do for each other. Then we can have an agenda, then we can have a mandate, then we know what we're demanding, then we know what change looks like, and we can push back on performative stuff.
Awesome. Well, Kwesi, back to you one more time. You mentioned about the government sort of having an agenda, and we know what that agenda is. What do you think is the government's agenda ultimately? I know it's quite a loaded question, but you know, what does that look like for you?
I mean, I would turn to Stokely Kwame Ture, how he described it. He spoke about internal colonialism. We're still dealing with colonialism. We haven't, removed that thorn from our skin. We haven't taken that knife out of our back. It's still colonialism. It's, we can call it neo-colonialism. We can call it what we want, but right here in the UK, that's literally what we're dealing with. And when Kwame Ture spoke about internal colonialism, he spoke about the reality we can have here in the UK. You can have a council estate with all the associated social conditions, and then across the road, you can have opulence and, completely different lifestyle. If a murder happens on that side of the road, who cares? Murder happens on this side of the road, front page news. Oh my God, what's happened? How is this person murdered? That's by design. That's by design. So that's the agenda, to maintain this hierarchy, this racialized hierarchy, and to keep extracting resources where we come from, and to keep us talking about everything except where we come from and how what's happening over there relates to what's happening to us here. So controlling our narrative, deciding what we focus on, deciding on, having an input in what we say the solutions are to our problems. That's the government's agenda, to keep us kind of divided and off target.
And just one recent example of that government state agent oppressive way of trying to control is when they recently did the race report. As we all know, when they produced that, they was essentially saying that the UK is no longer or hasn't been racist. I mean, that just goes to show what their agenda is and where they're at. And that whole thing that Kwesi was talking about, divide and rule, and you've got the puppets who have to play fiddle for the state agents to play that game. But even that report shows what they're leading with, what they're really saying about the situation. They have no idea. And so, it makes us, like people did, feel absolutely enraged to take that back. They haven't consulted the right people. They haven't, gone about it in the right way. And yet still, that's what they would go out and do. Those kinds of reports and things like that are constantly going out, or that kind of viewpoint is constantly the front page of how they see this, how they see the certainly people of color in that way.
Thank you. Shane, did you see the race report, or did you hear about the race report as well?
I didn't take the time to actually look at it because I don't have the time for that. Like, I knew the basis of what they wrote. Yeah.
So, just on the sort of, and I completely understand why you didn't want to put yourself through that, but how did it make you feel to hear that, from the very most senior level in this country, that that's how pervasive the denial of racism and institutional racism in this country is? How did it make you feel to sort of have to acknowledge that?
It's upsetting, but also not really. It doesn't define my existence. I think, like, I know that these things happen, and I know that we live in a racist society. So for a report to come from the government, who have been denying it for ages, to come out and say that it doesn't exist, doesn't affect my beliefs, and I hope it doesn't affect the beliefs of people around me.
Okay. Hannah, how did it feel for you to sort of come across the race report?
I don't really know if anyone sort of like in our age group really expected anything accurate to come from it. I wasn't surprised with what I've read of it. It was from people that were sort of saying that they didn't want their opinion to be in it, or like their quotes and stuff. There was a lot of people that came out with that. I don't really think anyone that I am like associated with, or like myself, I don't think anyone's surprised. It was probably just full of lies, much like most of the things that have been put out by the government recently. I don't really think it made me feel any type of way. I wasn't particularly surprised that it was wrong.
Yeah. And I think that kind of speaks a bit to what we're dealing with, you know, when the fact that most of us aren't even surprised about that sort of, you know, speaks volumes in itself. But, you know, I want to go back to you, Tony, and, you know, I assume that a lot of the conversations that we have now about racism in this country are probably very similar to the ones that you were having in 1981. Do you see an end to this?
No. Just, you know, history has shown me in my limited lifetime that before 81, we had the famous speech by Enoch Powell in the 60s, and you know what he sort of said, you know, one day the black man will have the upper hand on, and we're all finished in peril. I mean, that's just blatant racism there in your face back then, and so I think it has quietened down and ended in that kind of rhetoric, in that kind of way, unless you're with people like Tommy Robinson and his gang. But really, I think media are very clever, and they're finding ways to play out these narratives, not in the same way, as blatant and as crude as it was back in the day. So no, it hasn't ended. I can't see an end to it. There is so much work to be done for everybody on this planet, of all people, to really, you know, do some reconciliation work for themselves and the people that they associate themselves with, and for there is so much work to be done. So no, I can't see an end to it, because it's just, if we can't get the acknowledgement and the understanding and the basics right, then we're not going to get the bigger picture right at all. So it's deep, but you know, we're all doing our bit, aren't we, in some way, whether we're doing it because we have to, and we tick the boxes, or we have to do it because it's the in thing. And there are people who have been doing this, making it their lifeblood, their blood, sweat and tears, and it's burnt them out over the years, because that's all they focus on, this kind of work for their communities. And so it's never ending. It's never ending. This work will continue, and I hope, and I'm just honored to be in this space tonight with you young people who are picking up the baton in your own ways and going forward, because after you there will be the next lot with their you know, ways of doing things. So no, I don't see the end.
Thank you. Pamela, does our generation have what it takes to sort of, you know, keep holding the torch, keep moving it forward? And in that, I don't just mean do we have what it takes, but is our heart in the right place? You know, I think that we live in quite a unique generation, I think, you know, in terms of technology and social media. And I think we might not realize the impact that it's had on us until we look back from the future. But, you know, do you think our heart is in the right place to make the necessary changes that need to be made?
Yeah, I feel like in every generation there are those, you know, activists and people who are ready to stand and make a change. And I think social media helps with that, in terms of more people able to learn about things in a quicker way. You know, news stories breaking out, seeing like videos, people being able to take the power into their own hands and, you know, becoming a journalist essentially, showing the truth out there in an unfiltered manner. However much people try to control like the news and stuff, we always have our phone and our camera, and we can make sure we take evidence of things. I think a way people have like started to become an activist is by seeing like atrocities over the like social media and over videos and stuff, and become like aware of it and like, right, we have to do something about this. I can't believe this has happened. And that's been through social media. So I feel like with the technology, you know, being such an important role in our lives and the younger people lives, they will only learn more and more, and hopefully, you know, be aware of that and want to create change like some of us in this generation and the previous generations do. But also I feel like what needs to change is the curriculum, the Black, like there being Black history in the curriculum. Once that is like put in place as a permanent thing, it will really help us and the history of people of color, and just from a younger age becoming aware of what has happened in our history. And because even the race report, they talked about the curriculum and how the statistics of how minority BAME and minority young people did, as well as the white counterparts. And they got their statistic from wherever they got it, I'm not sure, but there's still so much struggle as people of color face in education, and that we don't know about growing up, and we only find out what by our own means when we're older. But I feel like with social media and more technology, people can find that out way quicker, over the phone by their social media. So I feel like it will continue, and I hope it does. And I think, like I said, basically, like it's quicker to find out about these things over the over the phone and social media. So
Shane, what kind of impact would it? Oh, sorry, Tony.
No, I was just going to say, I think what Pamela was saying was absolutely spot on. I think there are ways that people are finding out about stuff on social media more, even at like being crude. At one end, you've got, I suppose, the keyboard warrior who's typing away and saying, yeah, I'm this, I'm that, but they don't really get up and do anything, but they're still there creating from the keyboard. Whereas at the other end, you've got real hardcore people who are really getting up in their communities and doing things, and out there and, willing to take the risk and get arrested. And so that whole spectrum of people on that line is huge, and different people move up and down that spectrum in different ways, depending on their well-being and their capacity and all of that, but that whole line of activism is what keeps, activism alive in some way.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I think that social media has had a really transformative, impact on the nature of activism, and, just sort of about information sharing, isn't it? Now it's sort of at the tip of our fingers, which is, something we should be grateful for. And I was going to say, Shane, for you, what impact do you think it would have had on you growing up if you had learned more about Black history, and not just Black history in terms of, in the sort of Western context, but, pre-colonial Black history? What impact do you think that would have had on you and who you are as a person?
I think it would have had a really great impact. I can't say how it would have changed me, but I think it would allow me to be sure of myself in a sense that I didn't think I have when I grew up. It would give me a sense of identity, because I think a lot of times, so I'm first generation British, so I think a lot of times there's a sort of confusion around how your identity sits within the community and the space that you're in and the people that you interact with. So I think that gets lost often. And I think if we could teach kids about their heritage, and not just in classrooms, but beyond that, that would be really powerful. And I think, it would ensure people don't end up less confused about themselves. Or
yeah, no, I hear you, and I really agree with that. And Hannah, I have a question for you. What does, for our generation, what does leadership look like in terms of, trying to carry the torch forward? What does leadership look like for you?
I think, especially with activism, maybe it's not about being a leader, but more about facilitating things. So instead of taking charge of something, just allowing the people around you to come together and things. I think that's definitely more important, and something that we're seeing a lot in activism in our generation, a lot of collaboration and things like that. I don't really know if leadership is the way forward. I think it's the best sort of activist groups. So for example, ABL and of course Decolonised Networking and stuff. We're all, it's a group of lots of people, and being able to work with each other's strengths and then get advice from each other. I think that's definitely something that I see from like our generation, and specifically like the generation below us. I think they're really good at that. So for example, the Pimlico protests, like, you know, what they were doing at the school about their head teacher and things, that was like very much like, rather than leadership, as Kwesi said before, sort of like standing in solidarity, I think is the best way forward, especially when it comes to that. And if there's no leader, no one can get in trouble. Like I remember at one of the protests I was at, when the police were trying to break it up, it was sort of like they were looking for the leaders of it to give like a massive fine to. And it was sort of like this funny thing of like, no one was the leader, so no one could get fined. That was at like Trafalgar Square, I think. But yeah, I think definitely like collaboration and like facilitating people, is the way forward. So for example, like what 81 Acts is doing is they're like facilitating and allowing people to come up with their own acts instead of like leading them in a certain way.
And I suppose to an extent, what you guys are doing with you know, Decolonised Networking, you're facilitating people, which I think, as you said, I honestly couldn't agree more. Kwesi, you know, we've had the riots we've had 1977, we've had 1981, we've had 1986, we've almost every year there's been something, you know, going on with regards to sort of the fight against racism, institutional racism, and, you know, globalized white supremacy.
Right.
Is there more to come?
I think so. I think so, because a lot of these movements are changing their approaches so that they can have more of an effect, and they're finding more ways, especially through technology, to involve more people in the campaign and to really raise awareness so we can reach critical mass. So I don't see an end to you know, social unrest and uprisings anytime soon. You know, long may they continue.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, a question for everyone now, just to sort of wrap up. What do we want to see more of going forward? And, you know, not just from the community, not just from society, from the government. Like, what do we want to see? And, you know, if we were to overcome this sort of great battle that we've been fighting so long, what would that look like? Can we imagine that? Can we fathom a world where we didn't have to fight against these powers that be in the way that we do anymore?
I'd like to see more community alternatives. I can share that. Community alternatives to health, to education, to keeping our community safe. You know, that's blue sky thinking. That's ultimately what I would love to see. I think that's the solution. And as a step to get there, we mentioned the Cealy report, the race report. One of the most powerful voices that came out against it was the United Nations Working Group. And it's a working group that's been looking at institutional racism for decades now. It's actually a bit of an intergenerational campaign. The UN obviously isn't perfect, but there are laws and there are legal frameworks that activists can use to really hold the government to account. That's what gave that particular UN working group the authority to turn around and say this report is nonsense. So I'd like to see activists expand their approaches and begin looking at international collaboration and looking at international frameworks that we can use to amplify our voices. And hopefully that will be a step towards community-led alternatives to our current society. I think that's the only hope. We take matters into our own hands and take care of ourselves.
I think also what it might look like, Nile, is that there's the power that comes in different kinds of way, and we know that power manifests itself for different people in different ways. So the power needs to change. So from the people upstairs to people below, there needs to be that shift of power and resources. And until we can see what that will look like, you know, the people on the ground, I suppose, grassroots groups, voluntary sector, having the capacity, having the resources, having the space and time and that power to make the changes that are necessary for their communities. That's what it would look like, is people having some power and being able to use that power effectively to make change. For me, that's what it looks like.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, guys. And any other thoughts from Hannah, Shane, Pamela about, you know, what a better society would look like for you guys?
Oh, you go first, Pamela.
For me, like it can start from the community, and we can try to make as much change as we can, but if there's not someone in power that can really, you know, make change laws and policies and stuff for us, I don't know if Tony was saying before, as much of like the Black Lives Matter movement and everything, have we really seen true change? Like always the question, and it's no, things are still the same and it's still going on. There's still like murders happening all the time, and unjust and racist attacks, and you know, the boy that died in Birmingham that was killed by racist attack last week and stuff, and how the media portrayed that, even, you know, not showing the faces of the white men that killed him, and that have been targeting him, and the police not hearing the boy's call for help when he was calling the police, that he was receiving the racist attacks and stuff, police not taking it seriously. It's still happening all the time, and it's until someone in power can actually truly change and make a policy and you know, kind of reform or change the police, or it has to start like up there with legislations and laws, I think.
From the top down.
Yeah.
Hey. And Hannah, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
Pamela covered it very well.
Covered all of it. Okay. Well, thank you so much to everyone for participating. That was a really, really good conversation. It was really lovely to hear what everyone had to say, and you know, I hope other attendees enjoyed and will enjoy this conversation as much as I did. I'm going to leave the stage open for anyone to maybe, you know, mention anything, promote anything that they're involved with at the moment. It can be absolutely anything at all.
Yes. Thank you. In terms of power within 81 Acts, 81 Acts, cut a long story short, is going through a new transition, and essentially what's been happening up until now, we've had lots of volunteers who have been working behind the scenes to create 81 Acts to where it's at this present day. And that group of people who have volunteered years and hours of work have been called the builders, which me and Kwesi are one of, and there are many of us. And what's happening now is that we're going into a new transition where we are creating an exuberant forum, which is essentially a different group of people who will be responsible for 81 Acts going forward. And there will be another group of people called the aficionados, which will be made up of younger people your age. And I just wanted to hand over to Kwesi, who's going to explain a little bit about that and invite you to anybody that might want to come along this coming Thursday to 81 Acts Builders meeting to find out a bit more. Kwesi.
Cool, thank you, Tony. So yeah, as Tony explained, we're changing our structure, and we're creating an exuberant forum who are going to be taking the work of the builders forward in terms of how we facilitate all of the acts, how we support all of the people that are getting in contact with us, how we can get the word out there even wider that we're doing this work and that this is what's happening. So that's the role of the forum. And then the aficionados are effectively going to be curators. They're going to help to curate the different acts and to give them specific support to help them happen and get them off the ground. So we've had a few open sessions already. We've had people come in, and it's been great. It's been great. So there are a few more spaces left, and we've got another open house tomorrow being Thursday. Yep. Tomorrow, 6 o'clock. I wish I had the link to hand.
I put it in your WhatsApp groups.
Okay,
WhatsApp.
So
you
let's
cut and paste it in there.
So
anybody can come along tomorrow from this meeting, or you can share it with other people, and it will be an opportunity to hear a little bit more about the Exuberant Forum, what it's made up of, and how the process were inviting people to come into. So it's a Q&A, it's a relaxed Q&A. So that's tomorrow between 6 and 7. And Kwesi is going to put the link to that in the chat. But yeah, we would love some of you to come along and consider whether you wanted to be part of the Exuberant Forum or part of the aficionados. That would be absolutely banging if you were able to come along.
For real, feel more than welcome. Open house. You can find out more about the process, ask loads of questions. It's going to be cool.
Amazing. And have you just put the link to it in the chat as well?
I hope so. I hope so.
Awesome. Okay. Well, is Deconnect people, was there anything else that you guys wanted to shout out? Or?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we're Decolonised Networking. Whether you know someone who's between the age of 14 to 18, who's BPOC, who wants paid opportunities, we can now officially say we have 6 paid opportunities coming out this summer. We have events happening that are holistic health events happening in summer. We are fully inclusive, whatever your sexuality, whatever your gender, just check us out. And if you are someone who's not 14 to 18 and you want to get involved and help us out, also please feel free to ask us. We are always trying to expand our network. Yeah, we're South London based, but soon for the whole of London. Yeah, we're found on any social media, Decolonised Networking. Yeah.
Awesome. South London, then the world. Love it. Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And yeah, I hope we get to recongregate and continue the conversation one day.
Absolutely. Niles, thank you for all of your questions and your hosting, man. It's been dope. Much respect. Much respect to everybody.
Thank you so much, Kwesi.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate you.
Thank you very much.
Guys.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
That's
all right. Have a lovely evening.
Thank
you. You too.
Bye now.